Happy Monday, everybody, and thanks for checking into the TDR Trade to Black podcast. Hope you all had a great long weekend. I'm your host, sdales. Lots to talk about here today, including the latest numbers pertaining to the state of Florida. They look good. They look real good, real strong. So what does that imply heading into this election and how will these materialize over the coming months? Who knows? But first things first, we're getting some positive momentum. As we all know, there's that 60% threshold, and latest numbers showing Floridians are in favor of 64%. Will that number climb? Who knows? But got an interesting podcast here today. Mr. Varel is still away traveling, but it's MSOS Monday, so let's welcome in Dan Ahrens from Advisor Shares. Good to see you. Happy long weekend. And Folsom State Prison. Did you do time there, my friend?
I did not serve any time. This is only a tourist t-shirt purchased off the internets. But it's a shout out to Attorney General Kamala Harris, who locked up plenty of people in Folsom for cannabis.
Great way to start the show, right? Let's bring in our special guest, Emily Paxhia from Poseidon Asset Management. What do you think of that t-shirt, Emily?
I think it's on topic right now. Couldn't be more on topic.
What an industry and what a world we live in, right?
It's interesting. It's interesting.
That's for sure. So I said off the top, I don't know if either one of you got a chance to see, but some interesting numbers that are materializing in the Sunshine State, the state of Florida. Dan, I'll begin with you, but 64% was the number that came out late last week. As we know, that threshold is 60%. But are you, I don't want to say surprised. Obviously, we all like these numbers, but are you at all surprised at how much in favor this is already? Because if we're at 64 now, does this number climb as we inch closer to November?
I don't know about climbing. It's a solid number. I want to caution everybody that it's a poll, and all these polls are speculative. It was just over, what was it, like 1,028 expected voters. That's not a huge number.
Okay.
It claims there's a margin of error of approximately 2.5%. So it's encouraging. It's positive, but got to keep that foot on the gas of getting voters, getting out the vote, spreading the word, keeping it up. But I've always said I think it's odds on to pass, but let's keep the pressure up.
Yeah, for sure. Emily, did you get a chance to see the numbers, and what was your reaction when you came across it?
I did. I mean, I was happy to see it. I agree wholeheartedly with Dan that polling numbers can and have been wrong, but it does seem to be trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
I don't think we should forget that was it 2014 that this lost, but had 57% approval at that time. So it was pretty close to getting to that 60%. I think as investors, the most important thing is that we have to remember it's almost, so I used to run track. And one of the things that was always really important is to leave gas in the tank for the final quarters of a race, right?
Okay.
And so we all know the US voter base is short attention span theater. We have got to grab their attention and keep them focused on why this issue matters as a yes, starting probably in August. And we also have to back time to the mail-in voter situation. It's all incredibly important in that final push. It's almost like a basketball game too, you know, it's the final minutes of the game are really when the rubber hits the road. So we like this positive trending. What I think this means is that the opposition is going to continue to really push hard because they are seeing this. But momentum is always good going out of the gate. So as investors, I'm watching this very carefully, thinking about how we can support the movement in Florida, how we can get out the information. I mean, when we were involved in earlier initiatives, by the way, investors, one of the things you can do is become involved in the phone calls around educating people about what it means to vote yes for these issues, because there's a ton of confusion. And I picked up the phone back in 2016 during some of these ballot initiatives and literally made phone calls. So nothing is beneath us at this point. This is an effort. Grassroots, grass tops.
Control what you can control, right? If you want something to pass, then get to work and actually do it. And there is a difference that you can make. I do want to also point out as well, voters between the ages of 18 to 29 are in full support of this Amendment 3 as well. When I say full support, I'm talking about 100% of them. So we always talk about this great divide of 45 and older, 45 and younger, but obviously 45 and younger is going to have I didn't realize like how much yes, you're going to think that 45 and under is going to have great support, but this kind of support actually might be the turning point for this adult use to pass in the event that obviously we know 45 and older doesn't get nearly as much support, but this is a staggering number. And I know it is a small amount, but a good step in the right direction based off of that from what I've read.
Yeah, and Chad, that's where polls sometimes get inaccurate, is by who is actually going to turn out to vote. And I hate to say, but the younger generations, they talk a mean game, but then they don't actually go to the polls in huge numbers.
That's a good point.
Like some of the oldies do. But we do have issues in Florida, such as abortion on the ballot. And so once again, we like the numbers, but the margin of error is tight. So everybody does need to do exactly what Emily was saying and keep pushing and get out there and make calls and everything else.
Well, it's funny you say that. One of our viewers says, I hope people don't take those numbers for granted. So people start thinking, nah, it's all right. It will pass. I don't need to vote. But yeah, I think you're 100% in agreement with that, Emily.
Absolutely. I think one of the states we could look at as an analog is Ohio. Ohio is a similar composition in terms of kind of party preferences. And to your exact point about the age breakdown, you can see how the demographics voted on that. And to Dan's exact point, they also had abortion on the ballot for that initiative. And so it does tend to get younger voters out on this issue, as it's something that's become kind of a lightning rod alongside our issue of cannabis. But, and Florida is an interesting state because it's benefited so much from the influx of people, corporations during COVID, post-COVID. So the demographics of the state have shifted. And so I've been asking a lot around that from Yes on 3 and trying to understand what that means for us. But I think there's Yes on 3. There's a very organized campaign around getting this passed. And I can't encourage people enough to support that. That was, of course, spearheaded by Kim Rivers and True Leave, and then filled in with Verano, Sunburn, all of these groups that are supporting it. Our industry has a history of not always being focused and together. And I think you were talking about this just on that Wednesday.
Yeah, with Eric and Darren.
Yeah. And I think that we can be aligned on this and support one effort to get this done. And that's a strong thing. Yeah.
Nice to see. Verano, Cure Leave, everybody. What was it? 60? I don't know how much money it was that she raised for Smart and Safe, but they just kicked off a $5 million marketing program that includes radio ads, television ads, digital marketing, and billboards. But like you said, Emily, walk before you run. I think a lot of this spend is really going to focus hard towards like as we head into the fall season. But with that, and we've been down this road before, Dan, at the 11th hour, this messaging is going to get very murky from these anti-legalization groups.
Of course.
And this is where it's important, again, have these conversations to understand what's at stake, what's actually going on, and make sure that you listen in closely, because there were so many good points regarding rescheduling last week that Darren and Eric made. But this is another one of those situations where, man, the anti-legalization groups are going to be out in full force in Florida, and the governor seems to be at the forefront right now.
Yeah, 100%. No one should be surprised by some real curveballs that are going to come between now and November, of crazy things from DeSantis and the Sam group and everything else, to try to get people off of the correct path to get this done. But as you said, we do have a good coalition, if you want to call it that, in Florida. All the other CEOs and chairmen were very complimentary of Kim Rivers and the great job she did. But now, to get it on the ballot, and now it goes into a different level. And we all wish we could see this kind of group effort come together in all areas of federal reform. But everybody knows that it benefits them in Florida. It benefits everybody that has a single dispensary. So they're going for it.
Big risk, big reward, but I can't think of a better person spearheading this than Kim Rivers right now. But one of the main reasons I wanted to have both of you on here is because you've been investing in this space for quite some time, both of you, and invested a lot of money towards this space and seen its highs and seen its lows. But here we are today in 2024. Emily, I'll begin with you. As we look at this market, it's it's how do you approach this? Because there's no in-betweens here. It's either a vote that's going to be yes, adult use is going to pass, or no, it's not. You might buy prior to the election. If it doesn't pass, then you can probably imagine stocks will be down 20% the next morning. However, the complete opposite happens in the event that we do see adult use passing. So how would you approach this, or how are you approaching? Again, this is not investment advice, just getting some feedback on how you look at this market and knowing what's at stake.
Yeah, yeah. And I also wanted to just take a moment to give a shout out to recognize Kathy Jordan, who was she really was the patron saint of the medical program. She had ALS, and cannabis was tremendously important to her, and she just passed away. But we really need those advocates to help to, as you're talking about getting closer to the finish line, to talk about what it means to have these programs, why they've mattered, and why it continues to evolve. And that's really important, because we know the opposition will come with a fear-based tactic on this. So it's really, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I think because you were talking about the history, but the way we think about it is we look at the operators who have exposure in Florida. We think about how that could cut, because you want to look at operators who potentially are preparing for it to not pass, right? So it's like, be excited about the upside, but be prepared for if it stays the same, which means it stays a medical program, and who's functioning well in that program, and how they're thinking about setting up their businesses. So this is something we think a lot about. Now, I do invest in private companies, so we have the opportunity to talk with our founders differently about that, because they're private, so they can talk about it more openly. But that is something we do think a lot about. And I do worry about, if it doesn't pass, just the sentiment hit that this will have on the market, whether or not it means the companies are well prepared to handle staying in a medical market and not seeing that lift of the adult use market is it's two separate animal spirits altogether. So we do kind of prepare for if it should start to look like it's going that way, because our markets are already very, very sensitive to catalytic events and how they might set it up. So we're thinking about that. We're thinking about what that means in the portfolio and how we think about what it means for the operators. But being a long-term investor, focusing on really the big picture, we are talking to companies about how they're managing their businesses for either outcome.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately at the end of the day, we don't want to obviously focus. It's something you have to focus on, but in the event this doesn't pass, like, what does this mean even for certain multi-state operators within the actual state itself that had their debts extended by a couple of years, but things that we obviously have to be prepared for, right, Dan?
Oh, always prepared. I liked Emily saying, our markets are a little sensitive.
Just a tad.
Or however you said it, Emily. Yes, extremely overly sensitive to any type of negative or positive catalysts. So, once again, it's early in the game. The poll, which was only just over 1,000 people, was somewhat positive. Everybody, whether you're in Florida or not, needs to keep up the messaging, keep up the pressure, and make sure everybody gets out. And that we have a big voter turnout. Simple as that too, because that especially affects the under 45 voter age. But yeah, it's such a high risk, high reward for Trulieve in particular, Verano, and they have to always be prepared. Yeah. You can't expect anything in this business.
So fast forward, like, how do you approach this? If it's, from an investment standpoint, if we're in like the month of October and we start to see polls that are trending towards like this could be approved, does that grab your attention? It's got to, does it not?
It grabs your attention, but the funny thing here is, yes, we expect this odds on to pass, but we're not guaranteeing it. And if it does, we have every reason to believe that Florida will be a smart market. They're not going to New York it, is what I mean there.
Like that's right?
It'll be a market that will turn on adult use like other successful states have. And Florida should be, air quotes, the biggest cannabis market in the world. Now, that's a huge catalyst. But we have other things in the works that we've talked to death about. Rescheduling.
Yes.
So we think everything is moving properly along for rescheduling. It's only less than 3 weeks now till we come out of the comment period. But here's the big buts. when we get, is it going to be put into final rule and complete by November? And even if that rescheduling gets completed by November, we have to have guidance from the DOJ, from the Attorney General's office. It's impossible. And I say we have to. It's not just hopeful expectations. We have to, because no one in their right mind thinks we're going to have medical doctors writing prescriptions for cannabis. That's what Schedule 3 technically means. So there's going to be something coming from the Attorney General's office, from the DOJ. What's it going to say? Is it going to offer safe harbor for banking? Is it going to offer safe harbor for uplisting? There has to be some form of FinCEN and AML guidance in there somewhere, but we don't know what it's going to say and how far it goes and what the timing of all the rulemaking is. Because I'm saying all that because there's people that want to invest in this space, Chad, that physically cannot.
Yes.
I mean, there's a whole group of broker dealer firms and wirehouses, big investments that their investors can't at all. They can't invest in our fund. They can't invest in the stocks. There's other people that can't invest in the individual stocks, but they can invest in the fund. Right. And there's some firms where you can invest in either one, more power to you.
Does it not make sense, though, for the Attorney General to put some sort of safe harbor language into it? Because if there's proper banking involved, it just means more dollars allocated towards research. Or am I reading that wrong?
Well, Shad, you're talking about politicians and government bureaucrats here. So don't talk about making sense. There's no sense. And now I should let Emily weigh in on that whole diatribe that I just said.
Yeah. Well, I hear you there, and I can totally relate and understand that. Go ahead, Emily.
No, I think look, I always believe in looking at the things that can go wrong, because then you're prepared for them. And that's our job as investors. And so I think Dan's outlining what are important things to contemplate is what's the timeline this is going to happen on? What will the DOJ do? And maybe the DOJ puts out a memo, but then we have an election, and then we have a new DOJ, and there's lots of things to think about. And the reason I'm raising this is not to create concern. It's to think about the sustainability and the viability of growth of our industry, in spite of things that we don't have as much control over as we would like. And even though we do participate in the process, all of us, we've all been to DC. We continue to go to DC. I just saw in one of the comments, be a source of information in the room. I can't say enough what that means for people to do that. And so I think these are the ways that we continue to push ahead while we try to navigate these choppy waters. But it's good to look at those things and to understand them. And I think if our market did a lot more, then I think maybe we wouldn't see so much movement in them on either direction when we have different outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah. Our good friend, TDR co-host Anthony Varell, who's on location right now, the Garland memo is coming. That's a very good point. But I will say one thing that we do know for sure, whether or not, as we know, institutions can't come in and buy these stocks right now.
Right.
If there is, let's say, Amendment 3 in Florida that does pass, one thing that we do know, it's going to generate a lot of interesting conversations in the boardrooms of some of these institutions, whether they can buy these or not. Emily, based on your network and people that you know from New York and across the country as well, are they watching this closely? And if so, what's some of the feedback that you hear as far as overall investor sentiment and interest when it comes to not just the retail space, but from the institutional level as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think the rescheduling news kicked off a revitalized interest around the sector. I feel like had kind of gotten a little bit of the cold shoulder for a minute while it felt like there wasn't viable change coming. And so that definitely kicked off and reinvigorated conversations. I mean, I'm back into the mode where when I'm in the room with finance professionals, the conversation is very much like, ooh, this is becoming really interesting again. And then me, of course, saying, and by the way, the companies have become fundamentally far more interesting than the last time you looked at it, when the catalytic overlay was really driving movement in the stocks. And I'm like, there's more opportunities coming behind the names that are listed already. So there are things for people to dig in on it. So we're trying to be a source of information for those institutional investors while they're watching the space. I don't think they're going to be the first to jump. I think they're going to require those structural changes, obviously, but it's good for us to spin up institutional knowledge in this time. The way I'm thinking about it is this is our runway, and we're just gaining speed and building information and really getting the plane ready to take off. And so that's our job. We're taking all the informational phone calls we can because we want as much good work around this industry as possible when things do change.
Well, you bring it like we're at a new era now, right? Like
Mhm.
these companies are now in mature growth mode as
Mhm.
far as like being classified with a lot of these companies. Is that kind of the language and narrative? Like you're having conversations nonstop, all on the go all the time. But how has it pivoted, I guess, to where we are today versus where it was, say, 6 months ago?
6 months ago or 2 years ago. Like, I feel like in December 22 was when a lot of folks like this was like, okay, we'll revisit in time. And I'm talking institutional capital.
Yep.
I mean, for now, it's like we were talking about EBITDA at the time. Now we're talking about free cash flow. It's
Yeah.
a real, and more states have come online, and states that people didn't think would open up have come online. So, and I mean, New York, as challenged as it's been, is starting to kind of come around. There's a lot of things that are happening both at the state level, at the business level, and now at the federal level. So, but yeah, the conversation I would say has now shifted to the business case is working in cannabis. They're growing, and there's evidence of free cash flow. The tax piece is getting, resolved as we move forward. So there's a real business case here, and that's what I would say are the things that have changed.
Yeah. Feels different though, as far as the kind of new era of this industry that
Yeah.
we're in based on the latest earnings, right, Dan? And it's, curious to see obviously what's going to happen in the next month or so. But I think consistency and not a lot of change is not necessarily a bad thing as we inch closer, what T minus 30 days before GTI kicks off our latest earnings seasons. But everything that we've talked about, the momentum we want to build and the infrastructure we're trying to build is finally starting to take place, right?
Yeah, and everything that Emily said was, exactly true. That more states have come online, the fundamentals are better. I've always talked about the fact that these companies in the U.S. were forced to be much more financially sound than some of the companies on the north side of the border. You can't put everybody in a bucket, but in general. So all those things are very true. But then we look at prices and stock performance over the last 6 months, and it sucks, to be
I know.
blunt.
How do you walk into a room
And
and show a 52-week trend, right? Or even a 104-week? Like it's
yeah,
but everything else is pointing in the right direction. Go on, sorry to cut you off.
so people like Emily have great conversations with institutional investors that might be getting ready, that might be wanting to invest in this space, and a small percentage actually can invest in this space. But I got to remind everybody that's just barely scratching the surface still, because most true institutional investors will just stop at the door. Nope, it's cannabis. We can't. We don't care. We'll wait and see. And so we think, catalysts like Florida could be huge.
Huge.
Actually, coming out the other side of Schedule 3 can and will be huge. But does it mean a flood of institutional money is coming in? No, because a flood of institutional money can't come in. And then we get some other steps. And let's say that some of these institutions then can invest. Something I want to remind everybody about is that's when a lot of real due diligence might start.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would love it if some institutions just want to invest in the fund. But a lot of institutions are going to invest in individual stocks that, if they're no longer on their restricted list, and they can't invest in these stocks. So that's when they're really going to want to look under the hood at GTI versus Verano versus Curaleaf versus TerraSyn and everybody else. All these companies, I like to think of, you could put them in a bucket a little bit. But in the fund, we still have bigger weights towards GTI and Curaleaf and Verano, and much, much smaller weights towards some others. So I'm going to love it when real institutions can do real research, real due diligence.
I know.
And they can pick out their winners and others.
Those days are coming, though, right? And that's
supposedly, we just don't know when.
Yeah. TDR Traded Black podcast here on a Monday afternoon. I'm Shad Dales, along with Dan Ahrens from Advisor Shares and Emily Paxhia from Poseidon Asset Management. We always talk about perception of this industry, how it's changed over time. You ever stopped and thought about, we got the investment side and what we hope what could or couldn't happen, in the next few months, but you ever stopped and thought about some notable things that come to mind? Emily, you've been in this for a long time, as to how this industry will be viewed amongst Americans if indeed Amendment 3 is passed, along with rescheduling. Like, what are some things that come to mind on how you think this will be viewed upon? And really, does it attract a whole new, brand new audience, which is actually a great thing for this space?
Yeah, I think about it all the time, because I do think that the stigma has still kept an entire cohort of consumers shy. I don't think they're necessarily turned off by the space, but I think they're a little more shy to try it out and understand what it could mean in different ways in their lives. But every day I hear people who I never would have thought contemplate consuming cannabis are talking about it. And I think that's one of the things we talk about a lot, is when you talk to consumer analysts or BevAlc analysts, they're looking at this sector because they're hearing about it from the companies they cover that are non-cannabis, the impact of cannabis on their business, like wine and spirits. And so we have all of these things that we just talked about in terms of the business dynamics, the regulatory dynamics. But then on top of that, we have this consumer trend shift that is occurring with the young millennials and the older Gen Z. And I'm always talking about 21 plus, to be clear. But they're choosing cannabis over alcohol in terms of a way to relax and unwind. They're choosing cannabis over pharmaceutical products as a way to seek wellness in their lives. Yeah. And I think that what we know about these generations is that they also have a very, very close relationship with their parents. So there's a sharing of information going into the older demographics about how they can participate in cannabis, which is hilarious when you think about this, Woodstock generation that kind of like ran away from cannabis and now is coming back around to it. And I think, as an industry, what that does is it creates room for us to provide more product categories, lower dose products that people are more willing to pay for. And it's not just the tip of the spear, most enthusiastic consumer that's always kind of doing the milligram to dollar calculation. So what that does for the companies is it creates a broader product offering. It creates interesting margin offerings when it comes to their vertical. And so I think that what I'm looking forward is to this bell curve kind of spreading out and us having a broader consumer base to create a broader addressable market. So not only do we open markets by state, but we are opening consumer markets.
Well, you make a good point on how the cannabis space is indirectly drawing attention from news, basically from competitors, where their market share is becoming smaller and smaller. But I've said this a number of times. The younger generation, like alcohol, is going to be like reading a newspaper, like in 30 years from now, or not even like, it's just going to be so foreign, with the way. And, let's face it, a lot of alcohol companies have to be prepared for that. But she makes some good points, Dan, right?
Yeah, it's super interesting that she's absolutely right. Alcohol companies and tobacco companies are talking about cannabis. And alcohol companies have had it come out in their annual calls and their annual reports that cannabis is literally cutting into their business.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting because I've had a history of investing in alcohol companies. And what used to happen is there'd be a rotation. A few years ago, there was a big rotation out of big beer and into more distilled, higher end distilled spirits and so on. And then big beer did a good job of being more invested in the seltzers and the other canned beverages to try to keep some market share that they were losing. Well, now the alcohol companies, they've almost have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. They are not good growth in distilled spirits, in wine, in beer. It's all sort of hurting. And I can't wait for the real numbers to come out for this long 4th of July weekend and see how much beer sales and alcohol sales are suffering and how much of hemp beverages were sold. Because
Anthony was down at the Anthony was down at the Panthers Stanley Cup parade and was indicating last week that there was hemp beverage cans all over everywhere. So I thought that was rather interesting, to say the least. But I think the biggest thing I'm finding, and I'm learning about this space a lot, is that there hasn't just been enough attention and awareness and education on where the industry has been, where it has gone, and like where it's potentially going to go. There just hasn't been enough conversations, and a lot of policymakers in Washington, let's face it, they're the baby boomer generation that are so disengaged with, I think, everyday people. And let's face it, there needs to be the right messaging put in place, because as you said, 44%, I think the stat was, of university students, when it comes, it's down 44% as far as alcohol consumption at universities across the US. And that's of legal drinking of age. But yeah, it's a good point that you make, Emily, that, you know, consumer habits, they're not changing. They have changed, and they will continue to change, right?
Mm-hmm. True. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even if you go to the venture arms of the wine and spirits companies, they've all invested in these like non-alcoholic alternative products. You just saw Peroni launch their 0% beer with Leclerc as the face of the campaign, which was, I thought, pretty smart. But I was like, well, it'd be more fun to drink cannabis. But I don't think it has to be such a literal translation to, yeah, beverage is a format that we're all very comfortable and familiar with. But I don't think that, you know, wine and bev and bev alc have to be so literal and think, okay, well, then it has to be a drink. No, they could just think about the different ways people consume cannabis and invest in the opportunity, not just the beverage category.
We're getting some interesting feedback. One of our viewers writes, it's time to move baby boomers to Schedule 1.
They did pull up the ladder.
Christopher Brady, good one.
Like
one thing I do want to point out as well, from my conversation last week with both Eric Berlin from Denton's and Darren Weiss from Verano, who shared a really good point that was directed to these anti-legalization groups, aka the Kevin Sabbats of the world. And that's for those who are concerned about accessibility when it comes to rescheduling. Guess what? It already is. Rescheduling is about research and drug development. And that is an example as to how messaging can get murky when really the accessibility is already there. 500,000 jobs that this legal market happens, 39 medicinal states, 24 adult use states. Like, it's there. And research and rescheduling, it's all about, as I should say, about drug development and research. And I think that is where people really need to understand what the messaging is all about, and it gets lost sometimes. Anyway.
Yeah, I remember that was one of our talking points when we were making phone calls on the last big ballot pushes, was that regulation and legalization actually means that it's harder for the kids to get their hands on it.
Right.
And that's one of the big misunderstandings, is that and no one here is interested in making this more accessible to kids, unless it's like a specific formulation for like epilepsy or something. You know, that's a wholly different set of circumstances. But
well, it goes to show how many people are still unaware of this space, because some of the information that gets passed around for those that follow it just sit there and go, is this shit really happening? Like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous, but it is what it is. I will say momentum, as we talked about in Florida, is moving. How about Arkansas as well? It was reported by Channel 5 News late last week that a group of activists submitted over 100,000 signatures to expand medical marijuana. The deadline was end of day last Friday, which is July 5th. In total, there was 111,000 petition signatures spanning across 62 counties. Yeah. So another important step in the right direction. I'm hearing news about South Dakota today. So, Dan, I don't know if you got a chance to see some of the comments Darren Weiss has said, but he made it very clear the train has left the station, and we all know that.
Yeah, 100%. And Darren's a super smart guy we like to listen to. So
great hair. Got great hair.
He did have his curls.
Yeah, little jealous of that. But Arkansas is interesting. They do have a medical market right now. It's extremely limited and needs to be expanded. It's still a long way from getting across the finish line there, but it's a great example of yet another state hopefully expanding. I'm in Texas, and in Texas, we have these CBD stores all over the darn place. They're not very regulated at all.
Yeah.
They're selling Delta 8, Delta 9, all sorts of products that can get, that they supposedly don't sell to underage 21, but come on, it's a little easy, and who the heck knows in what's actually in a lot of those products. So that's why the Sams of the world and the other prohibitionists are completely so wrong. We need regulated, licensed dispensaries and rules in place for markets like Texas. And we need, in Arkansas, we're talking about a medical market. We're not talking about adult use right now. We're talking about properly expanding the medical market to people that need it. And, to back up a few years, medical side is what really brought people like Emily into this market, like Todd Harrison into this market. It was about getting well and getting treatment and making people healthy for PTSD and pain and everything else out there. So that shouldn't be lost. And we've had so little proper testing on all the use of all the cannabinoids on our human body. That's a big part of Schedule 3.
Yeah. Emily, here's a good question. You've been involved in this space for quite some time, investing in this space. So where are we at? Like, I don't want to say where we're at right now, but there's a lot of retail investors that get frustrated, especially during the summer doldrums of looking at these share prices right now. But what's something that I think, you've been in this space for a long time and are going to be in it for a long time still. So what do you think that you're seeing that maybe you could share with our audience that maybe they're not seeing to like say, look, I understand the frustrations today, but what the future holds, maybe that's what keeps you going. If so, what is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's just time. And I know it's an extremely frustrating answer, but I mean, we have been at this over 10 years. And so we're in it for as long as it takes to get to that point where we have an industry escape velocity that I think we deserve. And I know that's incredibly frustrating, but I just think about always go back to the Buffett Munger way of thinking of like, time is the enemy of a bad company, but it's a wonderful thing for really good companies. And for what it's worth, because I do try to share this perspective working with private companies, it is working. And how you can tell the way it's working because this industry is an ecosystem. And when things get really hard and the vertically integrated operators are really struggling, it flows through to their spending on the ancillary companies. It goes through to their spending on product expansion, new product development, retail strategies. And for me, what I'm finding I'm optimistic about is that starting in second half of 2023 through now, I'm seeing momentum regaining speed in this industry in terms of how the ecosystem is working and the way that these operators are becoming more sophisticated 100%. And the way they're approaching their businesses. Yeah.
There's no better way to speak that than the numbers. And the last earnings is the previous before that. And like, that's where the truth is. That's the moment of truth, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's about, I think it was a Teddy Roosevelt quote that there's no such thing as luck. There's just readiness for when a good opportunity comes along. And I think about that's what we've been doing in this time, in this doldrum period. And by the way, it is hard. This is a test of psychology to stay committed to this. And I understand just as well as everyone else. I mean, we have made incredible sacrifices to focus on this industry. You have to give up other things if you're doing it. And I do understand why that is so painful when you see NVIDIA doing NVIDIA and, you've chosen to allocate to a great company like GTI, but the sector, the markets don't move the way you want them to. So I definitely very much sympathize and feel for that because I know what it's like to be in that.
Here's something to think about too. This has happened before in the markets. Think of the dot-com era in the early 2000s, right? Crazy valuations, kind of imploded afterwards, but then it came back better and stronger. We hope those days will happen with cannabis, but for people that think this is a unique situation, it's never happened before, I do want to correct you. You're probably in some cases only 25 years old. And at that age, 25 years ago, these things did happen again. So let's see how things unfold. You know what we need? We need Tom Brady to give us a motivational speech for this industry. It's all about consistency.
It's all about consistency.
I don't know if you saw his Hall of Fame speech, but my God, he was so incredible. He's talking about, look, it's not about skill and talent. It's about consistency. And I'm like, yeah, that's all walks of life. Anything that you do. easier said than done, but that's, if you focus on one thing and do it over a long period of time, you get well and better and better and better at what you do. And we're starting to see that. So now comes the Washington angle.
That's right. I love that consistency thing. I think it's true everywhere, and focus. But someone just said that they're still here because they believe in the benefits of the plant. And I think that's also a great reason. You vote with your dollars in investing just as you do in consuming as a consumer, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of consistency, we in this podcast every Monday at the two of you, or what?
I'm gay.
Interloper here. You guys.
What'd you guys think? I thought you guys were both great. This is good as far as coming in. I know Mr. Varel is out in Western Canada right now. He's in the.
We don't need Anthony for anything. I like talking to Emily.
I love Danimal. We got this, man.
Yeah, exactly. This has been good, but the whole point here today is just to speak to obviously some of the most respected thought leaders. We go to a lot of these conferences. I know that you guys are on panels and always having discussions. So, you know, that's what we kind of try to do with our audience here today, that if you can't attend, obviously, those conferences, those bring these panels to our live streams each and every week. So appreciate the feedback. I think it's important for people to understand how we're approaching, knowing that you guys have invested and managed a lot of money in this space, but how are we approaching heading into the federal election? So leave some comments below and let us know what you thought, and let us know some feedback, and whether you agree or disagree with Emily or Dan. Either way, I'd love to hear your feedback. And most importantly, continue to stay connected as we give you all kinds of information here in the cannabis space. In the meantime, again, great shout out, obviously, you said, to Kathy Jordan. Rest in peace, obviously, to her and all of her family. As you said, she was a big advocate. She said the medical cannabis basically prolonged her life by a couple of decades. So need advocates and need more support amongst this community. But rest in peace, obviously, to Kathy Jordan, because she was a great advocate for this space. So on that note, I'll leave it at that. But Emily, Dan, appreciate you checking in. And most importantly, let's keep in touch.
Thank you.
Hey, quick happy birthday to Don Murphy. Quick,
Don Murphy.
Don.
Well said. I texted him a couple hours ago, but you actually brought that to my attention. But yes, the Don. Isn't he?
He's a good one.
Isn't he great what he does for this space?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Don Murphy. Leave some comments below. Wish Mr. Murphy a big happy birthday. Guys, enjoy the rest of your noon.
Thanks, everyone.
Emily, thanks as well. Okay.
Thanks all.
All right. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. Lots of momentum building. You guys getting all excited? Leave comments below. Again, we want to take this viral. Smash that like button and make sure to click on that bell for all notifications as we start to bring on bigger and bigger guests. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, the Baked In newsletter, by logging on to thedalesreport.com. And we want to take this viral, as I said, and make this community grow. So make sure to subscribe on that channel, because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.